Joining us now with reaction, the author of the New York Times bestseller, Clinton Cash. Peter Schweizer is with us, Fox News contributor Doug Schoen, and the author of a brand new book out today. It's called The Quiet Man, The Indispensable Presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush, Governor John Sununu. You know, one thing you can't say about George Herbert Walker Bush is he wasn't, people believed him to be honest and trustworthy.
That's how he succeeded with getting all the success he did in things like pulling NATO together, getting Desert Storm Coalition put together, getting legislation passed. He worked with Tom Foley and George Mitchell. It was tough politically, but they trusted each other.
But how do you possible to have those numbers on honesty and trustworthiness where they are for Hillary and still get elected?
I hope not.
All right, good point. Peter, let me go to you. Still, if you notice, she's spending very little time near the press. Ed Henry tried to ask a tough question about this today, Peter. No access. Doug thinks it's the greatest strategy in the world. I've interviewed him before. But how long can she get away with this?
Well, I think that's the challenge, Sean, is if a majority of people don't think you're trustworthy and honest, standing in front of the press and giving an explanation for something, you've already got half the people that aren't going to believe what you're saying. So I think the challenge is, transparency on some basic issues, and she doesn't seem to want to go there. I mean, just transparency on the donors to the Clinton Foundation, which they promised President-elect Obama they would provide. There's still more than 1,000 of them that they have not disclosed. So she could give a press conference to talk about this, but really actions speak louder than words, and I think she's convinced that she can ride this out and not worry about it, unfortunately.
And Doug, you're taking the position that she could just ride the way she's going as long as the campaign goes on and get away with not answering questions. She's going to have to debate at some point. She's going to have tough questions asked at some point about the server, about Peter's book, about ethical issues, Benghazi. I don't think she's going to have very good answers if she's asked in the right way.
Well, she may not, but you know what? Strategically, Peter's right. This is not the time for her to do it. She'll have to debate when there are not 17 Republicans, but perhaps 1 or 2. The other thing, Sean, is, as your interviews suggest, the dimensions of political choice are not limited to who you think is honest or trustworthy. Otherwise, Richard Nixon wouldn't have been elected in 1968. Candidly, she is making the right decision to talk about issues, to stay insulated from the national media, and most of all, to avoid interviews where she has to answer questions. As I freely acknowledged, she doesn't have good answers.
Governor? But, Doug, the minute she makes a mistake, it's all going to come down on her. This is a great strategy as long as you don't make a mistake, but she's going to, and then everybody's going to assume that the 2 months that she didn't speak because all she does is make mistakes. So it's a high-risk strategy, and I don't think she can pull it off.
Governor, the launch of her campaign until today hasn't exactly been success after success, and she's still leading in the polls. So I would draw absolutely the opposite conclusion from the data you're analyzing.
She's leading in the polls against nobody. Even on the Republican side,
you're the one who's saying the field is nobody, Governor. She's running against Jeb, who's sinking, and you've got 15 other candidates, all of whom are in, the low to mid-40s. So I think it's working pretty well for her. I tell her to do the same thing.
I actually think if you look at those numbers carefully, they're much worse than you think. When you have a party with 15 candidates and somebody calls the supporter of one of those candidates and says head-to-head, Mrs. Clinton versus the other candidate, you don't want to give the other candidate credit. And so you cast your telephone vote for Mrs. Clinton, and she still is close to most of them.
All right, let me ask this. Jeb Bush launched today.
Right.
You are close to the father. Are you supporting Jeb?
I'm not. I have too many friends in this race. I'm trying to stay out of it.
All right.
It's going to be a great race, though.
Let me put on a new ad that was put out by Marco Rubio's campaign addressing the issue of Hillary making the comment about, the Republicans are yesterday. Watch this.
They're all singing the same old song. A song called Yesterday. They believe in yesterday.
Yesterday is over. We must change the decisions we are making by changing the people who are making them.
Peter, I thought that was a very well done ad, perfectly timed, and I think it was a good point. I mean, the Clintons kind of are way beyond yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I think partly what you're seeing in this campaign, Sean, is this generational shift and change, and we've seen it in American politics before. You could argue that this played a role in 1992 when Bill Clinton defeated George H.W. Bush. You're seeing, again, Marco Rubio, significantly younger than Jeb Bush, and, of course, certainly Hillary Clinton, saying that it's time for this generational change. And usually those changes take place at a time when the economy is not doing well, there's a certain anxiety in the country, so you could make a very strong case that we are ripe for a generational shift.
Governor, you wrote this book about George Herbert Walker Bush, Jeb's dad. Does the Bush name hurt him?
I think there are pluses to it, and there are some folks for whom it's a minus. The art form for Jeb is to figure out how to maximize the plus and minimize the minus through the campaign. And I think he's thought a lot about it, and I suspect he will.
All right. Congrats on your new book, The Quiet Man, about George Herbert Walker Bush. Coming up next tonight, right here.